Welcome again. I'm David Kirkpatrick, your host for the next 2 hours or so. We're in a session called Deep Tech in Sustainability. I'm a longtime tech journalist working on climate now, and very pleased to be working with Robin and Peter on this fantastic program. And our first speaker in this wonderful block full of technology and ideas about how climate can really be addressed effectively is Sydney Rodman. She's the founder and CEO of Green Revival, a company taking invasive plant deadstock to be used in bioproduct innovation. So in order to explain what that actually means, I'm going to turn it over to Sydney, and then I'll join her again for a few questions after she finishes. So Sydney, take it away.
Happy to be here, sharing my presentation right now. Yeah, so I started Green Revival a year ago at 21, right after graduating from university. And the whole point was to make the world green again and revive our earth, and doing so, giving each plant a purpose and a part to do that. So talking about my inspiration and how I got where I am today. My first job was in a forest, so I'm very familiar with just being around plants and being around nature, but you don't really notice the plants. And so I did a program called Kaleva, and also worked in a haunted forest every Halloween growing up. And we would do fire walks, and I would go cliff jumping, and I would just have a great time with other people. And I wanted to conserve that experience for other people in the outdoors, and part of that has to do with conserving the actual nature itself. So from being empowered by what was outside, I wanted to keep that going. And so I had a job in New York in one of the clearest lakes in the US, in Lake George, my first summer of college. And so I drove up, figured out where I was gonna live while I was driving up from DC, and spent the summer in a conservation job, underwater landscaping, underwater weeding. I was removing a plant called Eurasian water milfoil. And so that was the adventure from before in my life, where I could still do something that made a difference. And so when I went to school at Rice, I joined a lab, a coral reef microbiology lab. So thought that I was going to be a field researcher, and um, I wanted to be like everyone else and do some scuba thing. So um, I took a weird scuba job that I knew nothing about, and um, found another problem. So in this lake, there's a plant called Eurasian water milfoil, and I'd heard that people from swimming in this lake had died and gotten tangled up. The boats were having issues because they also got tangled up. The real estate values were going down. The tourism was threatened. So every day when I was taking out these plants, I felt like I was making a difference. But yet at the end, there were buckets and buckets full of this plant, and I wondered where it went. And that was the problem. The plants, when we would do this conservation work, go to the landfill, and that accounts for 11% of methane emissions from organic matter in the landfill, or it gets burned, whether it's taking invasive plants from the land, terrestrial plants. And 18% of CO2 emissions are from burning of biomass. So a big root issue of emissions, of landfills, and of other problems that I'll get into from invasive plants. I see invasive plants as a root issue with a root solution. And then other pictures just show how, while this was a crazy cool job, it wasn't unfamiliar to me. That same summer, I was free soloing on the right and climbing, and spending time caving other years. So it fit, and I made something new with it. And so getting more into the actual plant side of Green Revival, plants are very abundant. 80% of all living matter is photosynthetic, so that also includes the algae and seaweed. But yet global human-made mass, so all of the buildings around us, everything that we build has exceeded life. So we have more stuff that we make more than nature makes, more than light makes, because plants grow from light. So there's this unbalance now, and I'm trying to bridge those two together and make our living matter that's so abundant, that's everywhere, that is not scarce at all, become part of what we touch every day, whether it's a brick or clothing or construction materials or energy or chemicals. Um, we use biomass to make so many things, and so to be able to use invasive plants is the next step to developing our built world and conserving our natural world. So with invasive species, green revival comes in at the perfect point. Invasive species are an infestation, so they invade land, they come from another continent, usually a tropical area, because there's more diversity, there's more different types of plants and animals, and it grows uncontrollably. It spreads on land and in waters at rates that don't see an end, that don't stop, because there is no natural predator for it to stop. And these invasive species are spread from travel, from commerce, from hiking. If your shoes get or touch a plant and it stays on the shoe, and then you travel to another place, it's constantly being spread. And so I learned that up to 43%, in some states, up to 43% of all the biomass or all the plants on the ground is invasive. In Florida, some studies say that it's 33%. So it's everywhere, and we're not doing enough about it. Most management practices are either spraying or maybe removing some and leaving it on site. And with the spraying, it's like antibiotic resistance, but now the plants are becoming herbicide resistant, so it's not working. And the spray has forever chemicals, so it's not a good solution. The best solution is the manual solution to remove it, which is what I did in Lake George, but it takes so much time. And then at the same time, after Lake George, after my scuba diving adventure to remove invasive plants, I went back to Houston and started networking like crazy and meeting people that wanted biomass. And I found myself starting to sell this waste to a bioplastics company. And right away, in a few months into starting the selling journey, the entrepreneurship part of this journey, found an off-taker right away. And so, but there is also a biomass shortage. So to order biomass, most companies will take agricultural waste, forestry waste, or a purposefully grown crop that takes up agricultural land. And even with all of those avenues, many companies order from, in America, they'll order from Europe, or in America, they'll order from across the country, and it's an inefficient supply chain. It's and it's volatile, whether it's because of gas prices and the supply is in another country, or from the Canadian forest to America, or because we have droughts and floods and wildfires, and the biomass becomes unusable. So where there's an excess of invasive plants, there's a place for demand for the plants to be used, because without using it, it'll spread more, but having this incentive will create the sweet spot for green revival to come in. And so to talk more about the impacts of invasive plants, we've seen it in the news. We might have not noticed it, but the Maui wildfires came from invasive grasses. At least 3 different types of species grew a lot, in very dense thickets, and caught fire and created devastation. And that also happens in California. Not all of the California wildfires are from the forest. And in Pennsylvania and other mid-Atlantic states in the US, Japanese barberry is a plant that ticks love, and it is linked with increased rates of Lyme disease. And so whether you see invasive plants as a wildfire problem or a disease problem or other things that I'm going to talk about, it's a root cause of a lot of issues, and just rooting them out will help. I see the world as a garden, and it's up to us to root out the bad and keep in the good. I think no matter what the application is, no matter what the system you're talking about is, there's always the opportunity to get rid of the bad and keep in the good. And with plants, with the most abundant living matter in the world, it's so important for us to properly remove these plants so that we don't get diseases, so that we don't get fires, so that we don't get extinctions, so that we don't have ecosystem and biodiversity collapse, so that we don't spray too much herbicides and ruin our land, so that when ships are coming in rivers to deliver produce, that they can navigate, and so that we can have trade. And so if we don't do anything about this plant invasion, these on the slide, these issues will increase, and we are already seeing that. But we can take invasive plants and make it into something better than if it didn't exist in the first place. If there was no such thing as an invasive plant and all plants were equally good on every piece of land, if that were the case, then maybe we would have zero problems, but that's not the case. And so my thought is that the world is actually better this way because we are able to use these plants and decarbonize industries and help the green economy grow and incentivize community benefits and incentivize, you know, green hydrogen and biochar, and industries that want to scale up and create an impact already. And this just accelerates it and makes their case faster. So the two projects at Green Revival that I'm working on is hydrogen project and a construction board project. In 7 months, I made the deal with a public French company. So really great projects that I'm excited to work on. So I'll end with this. I started Green Revival on Tu B'Shvat. I filed for it on the birthday for the trees. In Judaism, trees represent life. It's a very sacred symbol, and on that day, the sap comes up in the trees, even though it's in the middle of the winter. So having a tree just revive life is what Green Revival is all about. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Sydney. Can you hear me, everybody? Okay, there I am. Hi. So thank you, Sydney. So, that beautiful vision of taking something we really hate and trying to help use it to solve a problem we really hate, and are so far behind on. It sounds though like there's some really complex logistics involved here in order to scale this kind of thing to a level that would really have widespread impact. So talk a little bit about what you think about how and where the most effective gathering of invasive plants may be, and where we can see the biggest scale impact over the short term. And maybe you can also talk a little more about the concrete examples that you're already working on.
Yeah, it's everywhere. So every state, every country would benefit from this. In the US, the South is warmer, so the plants grow more and grow faster. Yeah, so I think the best, it could be anywhere, but the places that are actually starting with Green Revival to solve this problem locally where they're producing are in Houston and in Baltimore. And so in Houston, that's where we're going to supply invasive plants to be used for hydrogen production, and that hydrogen will be used to charge EVs. So while it's being produced, it's also being used. So in that supply chain, all we have to do is deliver the biomass, and then the product is right there. So there's no extra step. And so in the Houston area, one big species is called the Chinese tallow tree, and it's a tree that is infested the lands in the Gulf Coast. So that's one. And then in the Baltimore area, we're working with a construction materials company. It's plant-based boards. Most boards are out of wood, but they're not using wood from forestry projects. At first, they were using hemp and realized that just relying on hemp isn't the best supply chain. So in the Baltimore and Maryland area, we are testing 6 species with the Johns Hopkins spinout. So I'm going to co-author a paper soon and see from a material science perspective how effective certain types of shrubs and trees are. But it's everywhere. So pick and choose wherever, and it should be everywhere. So it's not up to me where we should start. It's where there's the demand.
Are you hoping to basically build a business doing this yourself in multiple physical locations, or are you hoping to sort of proselytize the idea of getting rid of invasive species and using them effectively in other uses?
I plan to franchise, and I know that in Nigeria, there's a company taking plants from a lake and weaving clothes and weaving baskets. So and South Africa does similar things. So I'm not the first person to use it, but to create a database and understand plant to plant, technology to technology, and then share that knowledge with someone that's going to do it in their city. But right now, it's a smaller team.
It's possible you could even partner with maintenance companies that gather a lot of this stuff anyway. I mean, certainly it's extremely common for tree experts and other yard and facilities workers to gather giant trucks full of organic waste from plants and just take them to the dump. I mean, I've seen that at my own home, but not to mention all the leaves that are carted away in the fall. These are all potential inputs for your products, for your processes, I would assume, right?
Yeah, it's a rerouting. It's convincing everyone to change the route of their waste, and the waste is the last thing people think about.
Yeah, possibly the biggest challenge may be creating demand so that because many things are just thrown into landfills. Like I said, if we can create demand so that people in local geographies are able to contribute stuff to some process that really is constructive, whether it's producing hydrogen or some other necessary process, then I think you'd be able to see a lot more people giving their stuff in there. But because there's just such a vast potential flow of organic material, whether it's invasive species or not. I think it's a really creative idea, and it's wonderful that you're working on this and making progress. So any final thoughts from you? We've got to wrap up shortly.
No, just thank you. Thanks for watching.
Well, thank you so much, Sydney. Really inspiring to see someone young like yourself really taking the bull by the horns and moving forward on climate. So thank you. Well, our next speaker, sorry. I'm going to move to, we have a little break and then I'll be right back. Thank you again, Sydney.